Hello, my lovelies. So, this is a follow-up on the last video. If you have not seen it, I recommend you check it out. It's called Introducing Al Fayed. Today, we are looking at Tom Bower versus Al Fayed. And obviously, we know Tom Bower as the man who wrote the book Revenge regarding the Sussexes. One of the things that completely slipped my mind was the fact that Tom Bower himself had actually written a book, an unauthorized biography regarding Al Fayed. But I want to take a look at this article that was published in the Sunday Times, and it was written by Tom Bower himself. It's called The Wealthy, Flamboyant, Deceitful, the Mohammed Al Fayed That I Knew. So this was written in September in 2023, and it completely flew under my radar. So I want to go through it with you because I think it's very powerful. So 31 hours after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, on August 31st, 1997, I was flying on Mohammed Fayed's helicopter from Battersea in London to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Travelling with me at 6:30 a.m. on that grim morning was Fayed's chief of security, a pathologist, and a silent American lawyer. At 9 a.m. I was in the Ritz Hotel owned by Fayed, interviewing the staff who had cared for Diana and his son Dodi during their brief stay before their fateful drive towards the private family flat of Champs-Élysées. Sitting in the Ritz bar with Kes Wingfield, Dodi Fayed's bodyguard, who had been sent outside the hotel to distract the hordes of paparazzi, it was immediately clear that Henry Paul, the couple's chauffeur, had been drinking heavily in the same bar before he got behind the wheel. By nightfall, after interviewing 6 staff who had cared for the couple in the Imperial Suite, it was clear that Mohammed Fayed was behind the plan to dash back to the Champs-Élysées after midnight in a hired Mercedes. Have you noticed that he doesn't put the L in there? To my surprise, John McNamara, Fayed's head of security, who died in 2019, had bugged my interviews. He was furious with what he heard. By then, McNamara knew Fayed was taking no responsibility for Diana's death. Having orchestrated the romance between his son and the princess in the south of France, he was already contriving the fantasy that their deaths were plotted by Prince Philip and MI6 to prevent his Muslim son marrying pregnant Diana. That night, I sat in the Champs-Élysées flat with René Delorme, Dodi's valet. Delorme had witnessed the romance on Fayed's yacht brought specially to seduce the princess. By daybreak, I realised that Fayed was not the flamboyant, cuddly owner of Harrods many had assumed, but someone far more devious who had rightly been denied a passport. So a couple of things that I just want to go over in this page. The comparisons of the bugging of wearing wires. So, we've had many a times, in fact, the lovely twin talk, Nancy and Stephanie Sidley put out yesterday another one regarding Harry wearing a mic underneath his blazer for the Queen's funeral. So there's a bit of a comparison there as well. Also, this orchestrated romance, the fact that Al Fayed had orchestrated it, he'd done that social climb, which is, again, another comparison. When we look back at Meghan Markle, what we see is a lot of conflicting stories about how they met, when they met, was it a blind date, all this. So also it's the using the plot. It's a plot here that Al Fayed had done using the race card and a questionable pregnancy. I think there are several comparisons there that we can make. And finally, this romance on a yacht. Again, looking back at the days before Prince Harry, where Meghan Markle sort of began, after her dish soap. After my return to London, I witnessed how this fantasist and bizarre businessman brought protection by hiring armed bodyguards and corrupting police officers. Fayed's ruthless operation earned him a vast fortune and the destruction of many innocent reputations, but extraordinarily, he unveiled himself not only into the orbit of Diana, but also the Queen, Prince Philip, and many MPs. The passport to his fame and wealth was his ownership of Harrods, but it was the purchase of the store in 1985 that threw his crooked career from the shadows into the spotlight. So already we're seeing that level of corruption and the need for security, but also it's this royalty mixing with politics, which obviously, as we know, this is pretty much what Harry and Meghan are doing over in America. And it's one of the biggest no-nos. There's a political void that the royals they can't publicize. So another connection. Until he double-crossed the tycoon Tiny Rowland to buy Harrods, Fayed was unknown in London. Rowland, who died in 1998, was incensed by the Egyptians' brazen coup in snatching the prize he had long sought and invested millions of pounds in destroying Fayed's reputation. Fayed had only been allowed to buy Harrods by the British government after city bankers backed his claim to be the son of a rich pasha who owned cotton-rich estates from across Egypt and a fleet of tankers. In reality, he was the son of a school inspector who started out selling Coca-Cola on Alexandria's main roads amid the car fumes. 3 men helped Fayed transform himself from the street urchin to his billionaire. His father-in-law, Mohammed Khashoggi Mahdi al-Tajir, Dubai's ambassador in London, and the Sultan of Brunei. Khashoggi was an ordinary vet who lied about his qualifications to become the personal doctor of Saudi Arabia's king. In the early 1950s, Fayed met Khashoggi's son Adnan in Alexandria, and with the persistence and charm became Mohammed Khashoggi's assistant in Riyadh. Fayed learned from the vet that the bigger the lie, the more likely the perpetrator could convince unsuspecting, honest Europeans of a fantasy and become rich. So again, what we're seeing is this comparison from the alternate backgrounds that they express to the public. So obviously what Meghan Markle told the public that she was, from this poor background when actually she had quite a middle class background. It's very conflicting to the reality. But then there's that the bigger the lie, the more likely the perpetrator could convince unsuspecting, honest Europeans. So the bigger the lie. Well, does that include the bigger and the amount of lies? "40 years later, Adnan Khashoggi, by then well known as an arms dealer and bon vivant, met me at the Connaught Hotel for lunch to help my research for a biography I was writing about Fayyad. Outraged at how Fayyad had abandoned Dodi in Alexandria, Khashoggi told me Fayyad is an unbelievable criminal and liar. He added, 'Be careful, he's dangerous.' In Haiti, cozying up to the daughter of the murderous dictator Francois Papa Doc Duvalier, Fayyad got concessions and money to develop the port and oil wells. He was exposed as a fraudster within a year. To save his life, he fled overnight to London, but always feared that he would be murdered by Duvalier. In London, in the early 1960s, Fayyad posed as a rich playboy. Among his successful targets was Dubai's ambassador Tajir. Through Costain, a small British construction company that Fayyad part-owned, the ambassador offered Dubai's ruler, Sheikh Rashid bin Zayed Al Maktoum, the chance to build the Desert Kingdom's first hospital, concrete runway, tarred roads, and port. Secretly, Fayyad pocketed a chunk of every contact. So here again, we're seeing this rich playboy who owned yachts. It's a little bit, Epstein style. But also this connection with the port and oil wells, which we've just recently seen from Nigeria, but also this pocketing a chunk of every contract. And that, to me, rings light bells with Archwell. With real wealth for the first time, Fayyad griped about the need for a visa on his Egyptian passport each time he entered Britain. In Dubai, Tajir told me what then happened. We were sitting in my kitchen and I agreed to give Mohammed a Dubai diplomatic passport. I asked him for his name. He replied, Al Fayyad, adding the Al to make him sound more important. I asked him his age and he cut it by 5 years. Fayyad's fantasy of being the son of a rich pasha was born. McNamara, a former Scotland Yard chief superintendent, was Fayyad's hatchet man. He was responsible for destroying the careers of Harrods employees falsely accused of shoplifting, blackmailing young girls whom Fayyad had allegedly abused to withhold charges, paying bribes to police officers, and bugging and burgling his way across Europe to prove that Fayyad's honest critics were criminals. Meeting Fayyad's victims for my book, Fayyad, the Unauthorized Biography, published in 1998, was harrowing. Decent men and women describe lives wrecked when Fayyad felt the need to vent his spleen. Corruption within the Metropolitan Police meant that the force failed to provide protection or to prosecute Fayyad. With McNamara's help, I saw how he ran rings around the government, never more so than after he bought Harrods. So the comparisons here from this page, obviously, is this name change and the age. So we see Meghan Markle today, but she was once Rachel Ragland, amongst a few other things. And obviously that age by shaving off so many years, which I'm sure we would all love to do. But then it's this lovely little bit of a fantasy. So we have like Meghan Markle, and that being this complete fantasist of, you know, that princess and that adoring nature. So, and then it's the use of theft, which allegedly, blackmail, allegedly, abuse, allegedly, bribes, allegedly, bugs, yeah, allegedly, but yeah, bugs alter the narrative. That's what I like. All to play the victim whilst actually being the perpetrator. So people that criticize them are the ones that are then projected into a world where they are deemed criminals. It's so uncanny. The Sultan of Brunei was Fayyad's ally. Through charm and skill, Fayyad persuaded the Sultan to finance his purchase of Harrods for about £600 million. The loan was eventually repaid. The Knightsbridge store was Fayyad's calling card to meet Britain's establishment, finance some of the royal family's pet causes, and eventually persuade Diana to meet Dodi. By holding royal warrants and financing the Royal Windsor Horse Show, one of the late Queen's favourite events, Fayyad posed as a loyal subject. He also offered Rain, Countess Spencer, Diana's stepmother, a job on the Harrods board, and bought not only the exiled Duke of Windsor's house in Paris, but also all of his belongings at auction in Geneva. This, Fayyad hoped, would ingratiate him with the royal family. Although he half succeeded, he became the agent of their destruction, not least because he was denied a British passport. With blazing eyes and unhinged anger, Fayyad told me about the injustice of that bureaucratic refusal. He was denied a passport because American and British intelligence reports had taken note of his dishonesty. But Tiny Rowland's 13-year campaign, upheld by a Department of Trade and Industry (DTI) investigation into Fayyad's past, destroyed his credibility. With mesmeric ardor, Fayyad sought to disprove the DTI report, convinced without foundation that Michael Howard, then a junior DTI minister, had been bribed by Rowland to commission the report. He bribed 3 Tory MPs to ask questions in support of his quest. One was Neil Hamilton, who made the mistake of denying that he had been offered any money. A furious Fayyad exposed the lie in anger, and he had not got what he had paid for, and Hamilton's career was destroyed. It seems that everyone, including me, was offered a bribe by Fayyad. So just a couple of things on this one. It's the purchasing the exiled Duke of Windsor's house in Paris, as well as all of his belongings. Why did he feel the need to do that? That seems a bit of a suspicious act, considering the fact that he was exiled. But that comparison, obviously, that Prince Philip, again, who Fayyad accused of being behind the alleged murder of Princess Diana, but is also the one accused of hurting Meghan Markle's feelings by sharing that comparison between Meghan Markle and the Duchess of Windsor. And then on top of that, it just hit me, and that he had not got what he paid for. Have you noticed in that Meghan Markle also went on about that she could not believe, whilst going on royal tours or doing royal events and that she was not getting paid for it? Most, including me, turned it down. If only Hamilton had said that Fayed did offer him money but he rejected it, he might have survived. The Tory minister Jonathan Aitken went the same way. Fayed told The Guardian that Aitken had not paid his bill while staying at the Ritz in Paris. Foolishly, Aitken denied it and was subsequently imprisoned for perjury. Fayed's Cash for Questions scandal tarnished John Major in the 1990s as the Prime Minister, presiding over a government of sleaze. By then, Fayed's life was staggeringly opulent. Living in Park Lane in Mayfair, he owned estates in Surrey and Scotland, a home in Switzerland, and a villa in Saint-Tropez. Commuting between them on jets and helicopters, he often abandoned his Finnish wife Heini and their 4 children while he travelled the globe, seeking business deals and women. In Surrey, to prove he was an Arab, he often spent the day in a large tent on his lawn. In Fayed's world, money bought acceptance, access, and accolades. He was cheered by Fulham football fans and their Craven Cottage ground in West London when he pledged to restore the club's fortunes as the new owner. Like a pharaoh, Fayed loved to walk across the pitch, encouraging the adulation. So, not paying bills in hotels. We've heard that one before. And like a pharaoh, adoring adulation. It's a bit like celebrity A-listers on a red carpet. That adulation. The 7.5-foot statue of his pop megastar friend Michael Jackson that he had installed outside the gates was greeted with derision by fans, and the next owner took it down a decade ago. Fayed blamed its removal for the club's relegation from the Premier League a year later. Powerfully seductive, Fayed exploited Diana's vulnerability in the summer of 1997. Alone, seeking a holiday retreat for her 2 sons, Diana was pushed by her unconcerned family into Fayed's grasp. In the period when Diana was twice Fayed's guest in the south of France, I regularly visited the plotter in his 5th-floor office in Harrods. Gleefully, he showed me the colour photographs of the princess enjoying herself with Dodi. In those unrestrained moments, he revealed how he had rapidly bought a yacht suitable for his son's seduction of her. Was he hoping for far more from his investment? Adnan Khashoggi later told me at the Connaught that father and son often shared women, especially after Fayed's successful financing of the hit film Chariots of Fire. They had both made use of the casting couch. So, I think it's safe to say that it is absolutely a repulsive thought of father and son sharing women, casting couches. That's a bit suspicious again, looking at Hollywood actresses and that. But the biggest point for me is the unconcerned family. So nobody, royal or Spencer, was paying any attention to what Princess Diana was doing or what paths she was going down. Because one of the things about Princess Diana that we all know, especially from the Martin Bashir interview, is that she was quite naive. So that naivety, and none of the royals or the Spencers were watching her interests. But somehow it is the royals who were unconcerned about Princess Diana, somehow wanted her gone. Can somebody try and make sense of that for me, please? In the days before she died, just why Diana and the royal family trusted Fayed was puzzling. In the aftermath, it was even more bewildering that the royal family, Whitehall and Westminster, tolerated Fayed's outrageous assertions about hearing Diana's last words in the hospital, that she was pregnant and that she intended to marry Dodi. French doctors denied Fayed's claims, and the Rue Parsay jeweller who bought a selection of the rings to the Ritz for Dodi told me 2 days after the crash that Dodi chose one from his forget-me-not range. Definitely not an engagement ring. Yet Fayed's dishonest campaign, suggesting a conspiracy to cause the fatal crash, was embraced by many, and, in a damaging blow for Britain, was believed across the Arab world. No one stepped up to expose Fayed's fundamental dishonesty, to explain his calculated distortion of the truth. In a nutshell, there could not have been a conspiracy to cause the death of Diana and Dodi, because no one other than the drunken speeding driver, Henry Paul, and Mohammed Fayed knew that the couple would be driving through the Alma Tunnel from the Ritz to the Champs-Élysées. Nonetheless, for 10 years after their deaths, Fayed was allowed to peddle his lies without real challenge. At the eventual inquiry, Fayed's failure to produce a scintilla of evidence proving that conspirators had caused the crash. And then he was allowed to walk away without reprimand. Soon after Diana's death, I had rejected Fayed's £400,000 offer to write his authorised biography. When my critical biography revealing his sins and crimes came out a short time later, Fayed was outraged. We met several times subsequently, not least in the courtroom, where he and Hamilton were battling a libel case. Fayed's smirk in my direction as he left the court remains an ingrained memory. His performance as a witness was brilliant. As a showman and actor, Fayed was unbeatable. Hamilton lost. Fayed suffered one punishment. None of his children were competent to manage Harrods, which he had transformed into a stunning store and must-see tourist attraction. As he aged, he had to sell it to Qataris. His other punishment was the death of his son Dodi, and a dream. On several occasions I saw and heard Fayed mourn, but his tears, I believe, were shed for himself. To me, this is a powerful and quite insightful article, and I thank Tom Bower for it. Like, if this is mad. So he is portraying a performance. It's a bit like what we're seeing since Meghan walked through the door. it's all been one lie. It's like an acting job. Like, what role are we playing today? But I can definitely agree that obviously Harrods, it is stunning. It is a must-see attraction. There are a lot of um, Dodie and Diana bits around there, especially the shrine as such, and that. But I can imagine that Fayad actually was more upset regarding the loss of that dream to be a part of the British establishment alongside the royal family, more so than the loss of his son, the son that he abandoned in Alexandria. So, this is another article by Tom Bower titled Mohammed Fayad is a bully, liar, and political briber who treated his pretty young workers as playthings. This was for the Daily Mail back in December of 2017. I'm not going to read it all, I'm just going to highlight the bits that are relevant. So feel free to pause it at any point and have a look. Fayad was a handsy pest, bully, liar, and political briber. There were notorious stories of his conduct, including accusations of harassment of female employees in his office. For example, blonde Scandinavian models were invited to parties in his home. Other such evenings were overseen by a German woman who recruited pretty young girls as domestics with the promise of good pay and accommodation to care for Fayad and his son, Dodi. So once again, we have that sharing of women, and there is that aspect of did he not. But also, there's a little bit of a hint here of this recruitment of women, and it's comparable to Meghan Markle's yacht days, where she was classed as a scheduler, allegedly. So, a bit suspicious. Surprisingly, none of the girls' bedrooms on the floor below the penthouse could be locked. Certain toys and other such paraphernalia were regularly found there. I can't read the rest because it's too disgusting. Fayad, who endlessly complained about his honour being insulted by the royal family during his feud following his son's death with Princess Diana, and who spoke provocatively of Prince Philip's background, didn't seem bothered about the honour of these young women. So he never saw the flaws in his own actions. Again, something that Meghan Markle can't do is see the flaws in her actions and instead blames others for it. Little people never troubled Fayad. His victims, he believed, were too embarrassed to reveal his misconduct. Now, were they silent or were they silenced? Nobody willing to reveal the misconduct? And that it sounds very much like NDAs. And little people, I mean, that's a way, isn't it? That's just a way to really infuriate the people and then pretend that you're acting like a loyal subject. It was one of Fayyad's favourites, Ross Ashley, who some years ago exposed him as the shameless manipulator that he is. At the height of their relationship, he gave her a diamond pendant for her birthday. After their affair was over, she got it valued. Worthless, she was told. Fake diamonds from a fake pasha. That was the true testament of a man whose bid for fame, fortune, and acceptance by the British establishment has long broken into 1,000 pieces of fool's gold.